A lot of engineering leaders are talking about platform engineering, right? What no one is talking about that platform engineering is not about building IDPs or internal developer platforms or writing Kubernetes, writing Terraforms. It's not about designation or position or title or money, right? It's about what have you accomplished, how many lives have you touched, what's the kind of network you've built. Sometimes it's a lot more than people, of course, see the fancy stuff.
Yeah.
And the designation and the leadership title and all of that fluff that comes with it. But I always believe leadership, when you get there, it's very lonely, because everyone is talking about how hard it is to find talent, specifically in a GCC market. Is the outside perspective of me on different podcasts or seminars or events that I've spoken, or my LinkedIn handle will talk about my successes, right? Of course, that doesn't talk about my failures, but have I not gone through failures? Absolutely, yes. I have gone through multiple of them. Even if I could have touched that one soul and people remember me by that even after multiple years, I think that is where I'll feel my job is well done. The women who always gets asked of how do you manage both? No one questions the man of how will he manage both the home front and the office front, right?
One word for Indian tech talent.
It's resilient, I would say.
Startup hustle or corporate stability?
Always startup hustle.
Coffee or chai?
I'm a chai person.
Great. Today we have with us Supriya Rao, Managing Director at ClearRoute India. ClearRoute is bringing world-class platform engineering capabilities to enterprises in India. But more importantly, she is focused on real transformation, not just fancy reports. With 20 plus years of experience across global giants like UST, Infosys, and Harman, Supriya has seen firsthand how large organizations actually scale technology and where they quietly struggle. Today's conversation is going to be a mix of insights, real stories, and a fun few surprises you probably won't expect. So let's begin this conversation.
Thank you.
So Supriya, before we get into your current role, I would love to understand your journey. Like how were your early days and how did you really did something differently that you shaped into what you are currently doing?
Sure. So, first of all, thank you, Vikas, for having me on this podcast. I'm really, really excited. Trying to understand how the podcast will unfold, but really looking forward to the set of questions and sharing my set of journey as well. And I hope it inspires someone who is probably in the similar journey as mine and can take some key learnings and nuggets away along the way. So, yeah, coming to my journey, I started almost around 20 years ago with Infosys. Of course, I did my engineering in instrumentation and electronics, so IT was not a very regular choice for
And from
me.
which city?
I did it from Pune.
Okay.
And then my very first campus job was in Dubai, and it was into PLC and SCADA programming. So back then, it was not, the right career choice for girls or for women back then, because it was a lot to do with the field job.
Yeah.
And so I wanted to come back to India and try my hands in IT as any other, girl out there after completing their engineering. And when I came back in 2006, so I spent a year and a half in Dubai doing PLC SCADA programming, which I loved, by the way, but a lot of the field job, and hence I wanted to come back. So I came back in 2006. There was an off campus Infosys drive that was happening in Pune. And that was again for the Mysore location, which is like a 5-star, 7-star hotel treatment at Infosys. So those were the
catchy
fun
factor
days.
for
Yeah,
Infosys.
exactly. So those were the fun days. So beautiful campus, beautiful trainings, and they actually mold you into being well-rounded engineers. So I cracked that, went to Infosys Mysore for 6 months, again came back to Pune, which was again my preferred destination and location. So I spent a good 6 years in Infosys doing testing. So I started with manual testing, then I went on to do automation. Again, back then Selenium was booming in the days 2007, 8, 9.
Yes.
And scripting and automating stuff. So that was quite cool for me.
I think
So
Selenium is still active.
it is still active.
It's only the
Yes.
recently Playwright has taken
Correct,
over.
Right,
but
right,
yes.
right. So Java, .NET, Selenium, now it has moved on to JavaScript.
Yeah.
So again, back then I was very curious about, moving up the value chain, learning how, cool things work, how automation works. And then I gradually progressed into moving into automation. But then I was not satisfied with just testing the software, because right from being, right from my childhood, I was very curious as a kid. So curiosity killed the cat. So I was curious. I wanted to know how to build software, how that software scales, how that behaves, how that works in production, right? Production grade environments. How does it behave differently in production vis-a-vis when we test in dev and staging? So I moved on to taking, things that were ambiguous, things that were difficult, and things where a lot of other people had their own inhibitions and preconceived notions of I need to know something before I get into something. So I was
True.
really very curious, and I have realized over a period of 20 years I love to work in ambiguous environments. So these days we call it the VUCA world, which is volatile, uncertain, complex and ambiguous.
Yes.
But right from the very beginning, I always felt a certain kind of comfort working in ambiguity. So I actually jumped into something very unknown, and then I figured out my way of how do I get things done, how do I get my head around something that is completely unknown to me, and then how do I crack it and then scale and thrive and survive and all of that, right? So while in Infosys as well, I started as a manual QA, then went on to do automation, then went on to do even development. And not just in my engagement, then at a certain point in time I started looking at multiple different engagements. So different projects were under my umbrella, and I kind of became the de facto enterprise architect, overlooking multiple different projects and engagements. So that was like a thrill for me, because every customer story is different, every customer problem statement is different, their domain is different, the problems that they are trying to solve is different, and that actually gave me a kick or an adrenaline rush, if I would like to call it
Yes.
that, right? So that was my Infosys journey, and then after 6.5 years I moved on to Harman. So that was again a very interesting shift, because Infosys was a service oriented domain and Harman was a product. So I got a flavor of both the worlds, which is products and services.
Services.
And then Harman Kardon back then was doing very heavy work with their e-commerce website and portal, selling all the JBL, Harman Kardon's, all their electronic systems as well, right? So I remember initially we started with Oracle Demandware, and then ATG, and then it now became Salesforce, Demand, all of that. So back then it was again a very interesting journey, because moving from services to products, and how do you architect the entire end-to-end e-commerce portal. I'm talking about 2012, 2013ish, where again e-commerce was not in much boom. It was the early days of Flipkart and
And also, I can
other-
relate to this fact because I also transitioned from IBM to McAfee. So I can
Oh,
totally
yeah,
relate to
yeah,
that transition
yeah,
of service
from
to product.
services to products. Yeah, yeah.
That's a cultural
Yeah.
shift, I would say.
Cultural shift, a mindset shift,
Mindset
exactly
shift,
the way you
yes.
called it, right?
Yes.
But those were again fun 2 years. And then I again moved on to a company called as Expansion, which was later acquired by a $1 billion conglomerate called as
UST.
UST Global, and then they renamed it to UST. But then Expansion was a very small product engineering company, right? It's a startup scale up. And then, of course, they also saw all the wins in the different different arenas of how do you build a product, how do you take it from an idea concept to the realization of the product in production. So that was a very, very fun journey, and that is where I went on to even play the roles of pre-sales, right? So right from QA, quality, to architecture, to pre-sales, to leadership development. So Expansion UST was my bedrock for that, right? So I remember in my early Expansion days, they had run a program called as Front Runners Programs. They used to call it FRP,
Okay.
right? So I was one of the chosen one for that program, and we were supposed to even develop a business canvas model for what the next 3 or 5 years for Expansion would look like in terms of growth, in terms of revenue, in terms of new service lines, offerings. How do you scale? How do you hire talent? How do you retain them? So the entire 9 yards of doing business, right? So legal, marketing, delivery, engineering, tech,
You experienced
everything. Yeah. So and that program was a success. So we were divided into multiple cohorts, and then we all had to present a business model canvas at the end of the 5 rigorous months of training. That was over and above our existing day jobs. So we did that. Our group was selected, and then I was again given the position of running pre-sales when I didn't even know what pre-sales meant. We didn't have that function at all, because by then, until then, all our sales were coming through relationships, right? And personal relationships, and that is how we were sustaining as a business. We were doing business. But then pre-sales meant I had to actually talk to customers, create collaterals, decks, create proof of concepts, architecture docs, all of
Understanding
that.
their requirement,
Exactly,
proposing a
understanding their
solution.
requirements, not just selling what we have, but curating
Yes.
solutions as per the customer
That's the bigger
requirements.
problem
Exactly. And then doing this with multiple customers at the same go,
at the
right?
same time.
So there's a lot of context switching, there's a lot of business acumen, technical acumen, understanding, all of that actually came into play.
So as we teach in engineering software development life cycle, I think you have connected all the dots in your
Exactly,
career.
exactly, yeah.
From QA to dev to architect to pre-sales.
Absolutely.
Everything.
Absolutely. And pre-sales was my most fun journey. It was challenging as well, but it was
Yeah.
fun challenge.
There are
working.
you require a different DNA to
Yeah,
enjoy
exactly.
pre-sales or anything related to sales.
Exactly. See, because you don't have working hours, you are always on the go. If the customer requires something by this
have to be there.
deadline, you actually burn the midnight oil and get things done, get it
Yes.
delivered. And you need to understand your competition, heuristics, how are we differentiating? How do we have an edge over others? And, curating those stuff. And again, talking to multiple different stakeholders, because sometimes you're dependent on others to get that information to you, right? You might be the SME, you might not be the subject matter expert, but then you're dependent on a lot more individuals, and you need to understand the legal clause, the financial clause, the gross margin, EBIT. How are you even sizing, effort estimating the deal? How are you sizing the deal in terms of commercials, whether you're making business, profit, margins, all of that. So that was a real fun journey and experience, but I really thoroughly enjoyed it, thoroughly. So that was my stint at Expansion.
UST.
And then within 2 years of joining Expansion, it was acquired by UST
UST.
Global, which was $1 billion services company in revenue and multi-billion dollars in valuation, because UST had a mix of both products and platforms and services.
Okay.
Right. So then I transitioned from Expansion into UST. So that was again a very beautiful transition, because then I also was sitting in rooms where we were discussing about multi-billion dollar deals, right? And competing with all the other MNCs and all the large SIs, right? So that was again like a very, very challenging, fun phase. But I took it head on, because I actually, as I mentioned, I like working in certain ambiguous environments, because there is a risk, there is a reward as well, right?
True.
So higher the risk, higher the reward. So I've always believed in that phrase. So then after that, I joined a company called as IntelliSwift, where I headed the entire pre-sales function. Of course, it was a California headquartered US-based company. And then after that, I, of course, joined my current company and my current role, ClearOut, where I'm heading India region. I'm partially looking into Bulgaria region as well. But here again, I was one of the initial few employees. I've set up India teams grounds up, right from scratch. So handfully, curating, hand-picking the talent, grooming them, retaining them.
I think retaining is something we'll discuss in detail.
Exactly. Yeah. And so we are a micro GCC. So ClearRoute is a micro GCC. We are set up in terms of our safe harbor rules and transfer pricing agreements with our parent companies based out of UK, US, and Australia. And we are an AI native consultancy and a platform engineering company, right? So
I'll get into more details about GCC and the current company, but actually I would like to step back one step before. Like, how was your childhood? Are you originally from Pune, or you did your schooling from somewhere else?
Yeah, so I'm actually from Mangalore, Udupi in Karnataka.
That's a
But
beautiful city.
yeah,
Even
beautiful
saying
beaches,
city,
clean
yes.
beaches, still inhabited,
Yes.
Not many people have explored those beaches, so it's clean as of now.
Right.
You never know once, the name gets out in the open. But so yeah, born and brought up there initially for the few years. But then majorly my schooling and upbringing was done in Mumbai, because my dad used to work in the banking sector. So a lot of banks were in Mumbai, and that's how we shifted to Mumbai. So a lot of my schooling, college was done in Xavier's in Mumbai.
Okay.
And then for engineering, I moved on to Pune. And then after completing my engineering, as I mentioned, I went on to Dubai. But then again, the IT sector was back in Pune back then, because Mumbai didn't have much large companies. And then I didn't want to have that local train hassles. And so I came back to Pune. And that's where I settled in Pune, right? So I have my house, my home there, my family is there. So everything is now settled in Pune. So home is where Pune is. But of course, my heart is still in Mumbai because of the fast life and initial years. The growing up years, you have that certain, soft corner in your heart where your initial growing up years are.
So that's an interesting observation that whenever you talk about challenges, so ambiguity challenges, and then say it was the fun. So you actually love the fun part, which otherwise people crib about it.
Exactly,
That
exactly.
there is a lot of ambiguity, there is a lot of VUCA world thing, but you enjoy those challenges.
I somehow enjoy this. Yeah. Sometimes it has always happened in my pre-sales journey while I started in expansion that I used to get those one or two liner kind of requirements,
Right.
that we need to accomplish this. Don't know the entire big context or big picture, but you need to accomplish this within this deadline with, of course, the stipulated
And you needed
quality.
yesterday.
Yeah. And it was needed as of yesterday. And
Yeah.
I was like, sure, I'll get it done. Right. So whatever resources I could gather or whatever based on my understanding, but then back then I also had a very good mentor and a
Oh.
coach who actually had done pre-sales throughout his life. So I used to go back to him every now and then if I'm stuck, if I needed certain answers or certain validation, if I'm on the right track or I'm on the right path. So I think that is also very important in your career if you are thinking of working in ambiguity, if you're thinking of moving up the value chain. So having a good mentor and a coach who has who has lived that life,
True.
he or she can actually guide you if you are stuck in potholes, if you need to move out, if you need to think radically differently or something out of the box. So I think that also really helped me jumpstart my career.
Got it. Got
Yeah.
it. Now, while we are discussing your journey, so any failure or a tough moment, because we all have those things in our life, which moment in your career that shaped you the most? Like
Sure.
you thankful that
Yeah.
happened,
Yeah.
something like that.
So I think lot of that. So it's not that I'm just painting a rosy picture here. I think lot of tough movements, lot of bad decisions,
Mhm.
failures, setbacks. But I think the only thing that helped is how do you rise from the failure? How do you come
Anyone
back
that you
more
want to talk
stronger?
about?
Yeah. So I think early on, after I transitioned from expansion to UST and then IntelliSwift. So initially, I had a mandate to build my team around me, right? So pre-sales team around
Yeah.
me. So back then there was a lot of pressure to get the team hired, but I think one major learning or setback for me was I hired ahead of the time, right? So not having much due diligence done. So quantity over quality was my mantra back then, but I've learned the hard lesson that it is always quality over quantity. So I made some bad hiring
Yes.
decisions that, of course, not just affected the margins, but the team morale, the ways of working, everything actually came at a cost. It
It's a very
affected
high
me
cost.
personally as well. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's a high
We run
cost.
recruitment agencies, so I can totally
Exactly.
relate to that fact.
Exactly.
A
Exactly.
bad hire,
Yeah.
how
A
costly
bad
that
hire,
can be,
the
yeah.
cost of acquisition, and
Yeah.
then how that bad hire affects all the good hires of
Yeah.
the existing
True.
people, right? The existing team in the mix. And how does that entirely, that percolates the vibes or the behaviors, the systems, all of that. So that was one tough time that I was in. But of course, I learned it the hard way. But then I also turned the tables around because now I always cut the noise. I have a clear signal that what we need to hire for, even if it takes time, it's always quality over quantity, and bad hires are definitely not the right decision. But I made it back then, but of course all the right lessons learned from having that decision made.
That's
Yeah.
interesting, and I think you started as manual QA, and right now managing director of a
Yeah.
Indian part of a global GCC.
Correct,
Like
correct.
that itself is a big thing, because
Yeah.
in that journey, because if I'm sure if you relate to people who joined with you,
Yeah,
Infosys,
yeah,
and started with manual
yeah,
QA,
yeah.
they would not have seen that level of
Correct,
spike in their
correct,
career.
correct. Yeah,
I
yeah.
think that for them you are an inspiration,
Correct.
that there are
Yeah,
those possibilities
yeah.
that exist,
Absolutely.
and
So
if you make the right decision or move up in the ladder, there
Yeah.
are ways to get there.
Absolutely. See, I think I do believe in luck as well. It's not
Yeah.
entirely hard work or mentorship and coaching, but there's some aspect of luck. There's, of course, your personal hunger, the
Yeah.
way you are built, right? Because I always believe I'm built a little different, right? So the kind of passion, the hunger that you carry within yourself, and it's not for someone to showcase to the world. It's to prove to yourself, right? How can I be better than my previous self, right? How can I be better than yesterday? How can I be better than what I did 5 years ago? Or how can I do better 5 years from now to what I'm doing today, right? And it's not about designation or position or title or money, right? It's about what have you accomplished, how many lives have you touched, what's the kind of network you've built, what value you have delivered, what you have been able to learn personally and deliver, right? So sometimes it's a lot more than people, of course, see the fancy stuff
Yeah.
and the designation and the leadership title and all of that fluff that comes with it. But I always believe leadership, when you get there, it's very lonely, right? You need to have people along the way, because sometimes you might realize you are there top notch, you are there, but then you don't have anyone else along with you or behind you to
The
back you
harder
up.
side of the picture,
Exactly,
people don't see
exactly.
that.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
I could see that you have a very good internal metric. Like,
yeah,
how do you evaluate your success?
yeah, yeah.
Besides the other external factors, you
Exactly.
have those internal
Yes.
North Star for yourself.
Correct.
Like,
correct,
if you are heading
correct.
the right direction.
Right. Yeah.
Okay, that's interesting. Now, you said something interesting where for most engineering leaders, the real problem is platform engineering.
Yeah.
So, what's the problem that they don't even realize they have?
Yeah.
Like,
See, that's an interesting question. And to be honest, I'm running a CXO event, a meetup on the
That's nice.
14th of May in Pune, right?
so, how people can register in case
Yeah.
people
So
able to see
it's
that?
on my LinkedIn
Okay.
post, and I'm also personally reaching out. I'm doing a lot of outreach to all the CXOs who might benefit, and in and around the Pune and Mumbai circuit, right? Because it's happening in Pune. Of course, all the other location folks are also really welcome. So either they can reach out to me on LinkedIn via message, or emails, or the website as well, the Clear Out website. So
So, I'll put the link in the
for
comment
sure.
box also in the
Yes,
description, so that
absolutely.
people
Yeah,
can
that'll help.
click it.
That'll help,
Yes.
Vikas. Yeah, that's a
Yeah.
good shout. Yeah, so see, a lot of engineering leaders are talking about platform engineering, right? And but they are talking about the strategy, about the ways of working, the behaviors, the systems, the tooling, right? What no one is talking about, that platform engineering is not about building IDPs or internal developer platforms, or writing Kubernetes, writing Terraform scripts,
Okay,
or
probably I'll
yeah,
take a pause here.
sure,
There will be some people in the audience who may not even understand these terms. So
got
just
it.
to make it
Sure,
in a
sure.
simple manner, like, can you explain what is platform engineering
Sure,
to somebody
sure.
who is just a budding developer
Sure.
and may not know it?
Absolutely. So that's a very, again, interesting ask, question, and a shout, Vikas. So see, we all know DevOps,
Yeah.
right? We
Yeah,
all know
that people know.
DevSecOps,
Yes.
building a CI/CD pipeline,
Yes.
taking the code to production, and then
True.
monitoring the code in production if
Yes.
there are any issues, bugs, uncertainties, risks, right? So the fundamental difference between a DevOps engineer and a platform engineer is, a DevOps engineer will build a CI/CD pipeline, write a script, and take it to production. A platform engineer will say, how do I templatize this, right? So how do I create a golden path, or a scaffolding template, or a rinse repeat kind of a playbook? So if any new DevOps engineer comes, or if any developer wants to request for infrastructure, or wants to provision a VM, say on
Got it.
cloud, so here is my playbook, right? So this is the path that I have created as a platform engineer. Go just use it. So basically, platform engineering is making developers' lives easier,
Got
right?
it.
So that is what is platform engineering is, by creating a self-service kind of a portal, by creating a catalog of sorts, by enabling ways and means, and providing ways and means to take your products to market in a faster, cheaper, safer way. So whatever that can be, right?
Got it.
And basically removing the friction in your developer's life. So what are the typical friction areas? I'm a new developer that's onboarded onto the team, right?
Right.
I don't have a clue of where do I get started with. So either I'll again, nag some senior developer that help me get started, or the platform engineer will say, this is a portal that you have to log in. You can go and ask any questions do you want. That, do you have this framework? Yes. Do you have this template? Yes. If I want to self-service something, if I want to, just ask that, provision me a VM, or, help me get this template ready. So that's already provisioned in that self-service portal.
Okay.
So we call it the IDP, the internal developer portal, which is to be meant and used by the internal developers who are building and shipping features and products.
Got it.
Right. So it's basically helping your developers team remove the friction in their day-to-day development work styles. Right.
This sounds like a very important part of
Very,
it, which
very
I think
important.
in the initial stages people don't talk about.
They don't, and this is a lot. This is picking up a lot more now, because if you go to any large organizations, large enterprises, like take it banks, insurance companies, retailers, healthcares, they have large engineering teams. They have multiple teams working in silos. they don't know what team A has created, if the team B can use it, and just build on top of it, because everyone is trying to reinvent the wheel. So if you have built a framework that I'm not aware of, I'm going to build my own framework, right? And I have my own style of writing code. You have your own style. Again, there is no uniformity there.
I've sat with one of my friend who is also running IT service company for close to 12 years now.
Yeah.
And I have always seen is asking the architects that why can't we build a reusable code?
Exactly.
Why every time for every client requirement we have to again write those login things?
Exactly.
Why can't we reproduce a code which can be used?
Yeah. So again, reproduction of code or writing those components and units all by themselves, the developers have also started doing that.
Yeah.
But then initially, the developers had a lot more dependency on the DevSecOps team or the infrastructure or the tooling teams, that I want this tool to be provisioned, or I need access to that tool, or I need this server up and running. So all the infrastructure requests, because the developers and the operations team were different, and then we called DevOps. There was
and whenever you need a input from external team, it will take couple of days.
And then you raise a request, you live in a limbo, and that request takes its own sweet course of time in terms of approvals and bureaucratic mechanisms of level 1, level 2, level 3, all the escalation matrices. And then it used to again live in a limbo. I don't know what's happened with my request and where is it, right? So now platform engineers and platform engineering came into picture in order to remove this friction. So the entire development team's focus should be developing features and shipping those features out to production. So what ways and means we can do, and what kind of artifacts we can build, what kind of golden paths we can build, what kind of scaffolding templates we can build in and around those, so that your job of shipping code to production becomes cheaper, faster, and safer. Of course, with all the security guardrails, with all the security features being built in, with all the automated test solutions built in, with all the automated infrastructure as code pipelines built in. So that is what platform engineering does, right? And in today's engineering world, platform engineering is the way to be, right? Otherwise, you are just slowing down your progress. You don't have a single pane of glass view of what's happening with your code after it's gone to production. Who's monitoring it? What are the observability, audit traces, matrices, logs, all of that. So all that put together is your platform engineering.
Got
right?
it. Now I think people understand,
Right.
viewers understand what is platform
I hope,
engineering.
yeah. And again, if you all have any questions, please do reach out to me via comments, or you can again reach out to me.
Again,
on
I'll share the LinkedIn
Yes.
in the description
Yes.
so that
Yes.
people can share
Yes.
the comment.
Yeah.
Now, going back to that, what
Yeah.
engineering leaders are missing upon?
Yeah. So engineering leaders, as I mentioned, they are talking about platform engineering as a concept. They are talking about the tooling. They are talking about the behaviors and the ways of working. But again, platform engineering is not just about building an IDP, an internal developer platform, or Terraform or Kubernetes, all of that. It's basically removing that friction from idea to production, right? And when I say this, what I'm seeing today is most developers or platform engineers are building locally, right? That what can we do today in order to enhance the developers' productivity or improve their experience or ways of working. But the entire value chain globally is broken. The way we deliver globally is broken, right? So I think engineering leaders working on platform engineering or working on how to scale AI should actually focus on that, rather than just trying to optimize locally within their teams. So basically breaking down the silos, trying to understand the big picture, or how can we take platform engineering globally so that the value delivered is intact,
Got it.
is what most engineering leaders are missing, as per my opinion. Yeah.
Got it. And as I can see, not many people are actually aware about it. So probably from your side, it may require a lot of education,
Sure.
workshop
Yeah.
kind of
Yes.
thing.
Yes.
That because if I don't know what I don't know,
Correct.
I will not ask for it.
Correct.
So now people need to understand that platform engineering is something
Yeah.
that can solve their problems.
Yeah.
Right?
No,
And-
you're right. And a very interesting anecdote that I can share. See, sometimes, people either are not aware, as you mentioned. Sometimes people are aware, but there is some change or resistance to it
adopting
because
new
I don't want to
things.
change, because I have a set way of working. Sometimes people are aware, they are ready to change, and they understand little bit of what platform engineering is, but they need someone to take them along the journey, along the way, right?
Hand-holding
So that
kind of-
adoption of how do you make them feel comfortable that this is for your own good, right? This is not something new, but by doing this, say if you were trying to provision, or your cycle time was X, we'll reduce the cycle time or the test time to X minus whatever that new number is, that percentage is, right? So how do you make them feel comfortable? How do you take them along the way of your journey, that whatever you're trying to build on platform engineering? And how do you help them adopt in large numbers? So I think any new technology or way of working or behavior that you introduce, I think the biggest success metric in that is adoption, right? And
True.
people willingly adopting it rather than by force, right? So their willingness to adopt, their willingness to give their success stories, that I was earlier hesitant in adopting this, but by doing this my life is much more easier. I will even recommend others to. So taking them along the journey, taking the developers early on in terms of when we are designing the product backlog for platform engineering, right? So I want even the developers to be involved, because they are the internal customers after
True.
all, who are going to consume and use it. So taking their views into consideration, taking their challenges into consideration, having road shows, success stories of where we have implemented this, what metrics we have seen before, after metrics, right? And then again, making them your internal champions and advocates for platform engineering is how you will try to increase the adoption.
And
Right.
and what I can say, that as we talked about the challenges
Yeah.
and the possible failures on
Yeah.
how to make the change,
Yeah.
not every leader is like you, who will enjoy the challenges and
Yeah,
failures,
absolutely.
right?
Yeah, true.
So
true.
they need someone who can handhold that,
Yes.
give them the confidence,
Correct.
and these are the step 1, step 2, step 3
Yes.
to make
yes,
that process.
yes.
And I think Clear Route is working on towards that
Absolutely.
goal only, right?
Absolutely. Yes.
So, Supriya, you are leading a GCC in India,
Yeah.
right? And so, where do you see the biggest opportunities for GCC's space in next 3 to 5 years in India?
Right. See, GCCs, or global capability centers, as
Centers.
we call them, right? See, of course, GCC boom in India has been since 1995, right? And it's been more than 30 years now that India has been running GCCs. But back then, and even today, I've seen most GCCs focusing on cost, right? So being perceived as a cost center and not as a capability center, or
Okay.
not as an innovation center, or not as a platform and product execution center, right? So earlier, when people started with GCCs, it was still looked as a very cost center. We have a cost arbitrage. You will get your resources here in India at a certain cost, much lower than what we can see in other markets,
True.
right? And of course, because of the talent and the mass and the volume, and the engineering, the STEM population here in India, it was a very easy target in terms of finding the relevant talent in the mix. Asking them to work on certain non-contextual, non-core kind of
English advantage that
English
people
advantage,
compared
non-core,
to China.
exactly, compared to China, or compared to Philippines,
Yeah.
compared to Vietnam, for that matter, right? So it was all good back then. But sadly, what I can see even today, not, I would say not all, but some GCCs still perceive GCC as a cost center.
Got
So
it.
I think there is a lot of scope for GCCs to move from being a cost center to a capability center, to a value center, to an innovation center. And now with platform and product engineering, basically the execution hubs, and where decisions are being taken from the India GCC, where India is seen as a second headquarter, right? Just as a mirror to
That's a
what
big
the
shift.
actual headquarter is, wherever that is across the world, right? So I think that important shift, or is where I can see the next 3 to 5 years will be and should be, because a lot of GCCs have started voicing opinions, asking for more, even positioning themselves as a second headquarter, that we are capable of doing this and we are actually doing this. The proof is in the pudding, not just by saying, but we have delivered this entire product line from India, right? We have taken decisions here. All our CXOs, some of the major product and platform engineering folks are based out of India. And we are not just order takers, we are dictating stuff now to the rest of the world as well, that this is how the product will be built, this is how the platform will be run, this is how it'll scale, all of that. So I think the next 3 to 5 years in that sense for GCC is quite exciting. We all should actually watch out of how this GCC play will come out. But it's an interesting phase, and a lot many GCCs are moving in that direction of becoming a second headquarter.
Great. So, as you mentioned, that opportunities are there,
Yeah.
but there is a mindset shift which is required. from external side also, from the headquarters, so that they start seeing the Indian GCCs as innovation center,
Yeah.
and from the Indian GCC's own mindset as well,
Yes.
that they can start focusing more on innovation
Correct.
and how they can develop new products and start taking the end-to-end ownership of those
Absolutely. Yeah.
things that they are delivering. Okay, so now, because everyone, I think in last 5 to 7 years we see on media a lot of GCC word being used. I think if we use the Google search for this word, I think there will be a steep spike in last 3-4 years, or
True.
probably last 5
Yeah.
years,
Yeah.
about the GCC. So but what's the uncomfortable truth people don't want to talk about GCCs?
Okay, yeah, that's again an interesting one because so see, to be honest, GCC talent, I think a lot of us talk about the talent availability in
Yeah.
GCC, and of course you will relate since
Yes.
you are from this industry as well, specifically handling recruitment, right? So I think the uncomfortable truth is people like to talk about unavailability of talent, but no one really wants to talk about the readiness of the talent.
Okay.
And what I mean by that is, see, you might hire a 50, 100 engineers in this year, but how many of them really own, their stuff, right? How many have that ownership, accountability, attitude? So I can guarantee if you hire, say, 100 engineers this month, less than 15 or less than 10 will be those people who actually own their particular piece, right, of area or their stuff in terms of engineering or development or whatever they are hired for. So that readiness, that ownership, that accountability matrix is missing as of today, and no one really wants to talk about that because everyone is talking about how hard it is to find talent, specifically in a GCC market, how hard it is to retain them given the
Right.
GCC market and the plethora of opportunities that are available to the talent. So there's a lot of demand, and hence there's a lot of supply as well. But then, how do you really make them accountable? How do you give them that clear path of ownership, that clarity, that vision is what again will make them stick as well as that is how the GCC will flourish, right? So it's all
Yeah.
about you're in a people business, right?
Great.
So I think so that is where I see we talk a lot about unavailability, but the readiness of the talent and how do you actually take them to the next level is what I think
Not many people are
not
talking
many
about.
GCCs are talking about.
And I'll share one experience here, that I was talking to someone who was an engineering manager at Google, and I have created a triangle of success, that there are low orbit engineer and high orbit engineers.
Yeah.
So I was actually asking, like, globally, when I have been to colleges, Google is one of the, like, dream company of any engineer, right? So I was asking him, how do you differentiate? What is the difference between a engineer that you hire versus the others?
Correct.
And I was expecting, being from this field, the answer that he will talk about skills,
Skills or
like
tech.
deep skills or
Yeah.
the tech.
Yeah.
But actually he used the word ownership,
Ownership.
that it's all about the ownership, that
Correct.
probably the lower orbit engineer shed away the ownership. They'll say
Correct.
that it's a 9 to 5 job, I
Exactly.
just have to do that level of work. But the kind of DNA that we hire,
Yeah.
he said, in Google we are
Yeah.
looking for that attitude of ownership. And I think
True.
not many people will be able to understand that, how to inculcate it, how to
Correct.
develop it. But
Correct.
I think that's a very
Correct.
important
Absolutely.
thing.
See, in Clearroot also, as I mentioned, right, I've learned a hard lesson that it's always quality over quantity.
Mhm.
And this is the exact same ownership DNA is also what I look for when I'm hiring, particularly, right? And irrespective of the level that I'm hiring for. So, again, a lot of people have this misconception that ownership is only for those who are working in leadership roles,
Yeah.
right? So, no, it doesn't start from there. Ownership has to come from even your junior most employee or the lower end of the spectrum or the low orbit engineers, the way you
Yes.
mentioned, right? It has to come from every engineer, no matter what. It has to come from every person, irrespective of whether you are working in engineering, tech, or non tech, even your
True.
support staff, your support functions, right? Because ultimately, if you want to run a well oiled machine, you need each one of their individual components to play their role really well, right? And again, very, very interesting point is we talk about ownership, we talk about accountability. And I've often heard this line in my organization as well, again, because I'm no different, that, I'm working in this field or this BU or this function. I see there is a gap or there is something that's broken as a process in the other function, but that's not my area. So I'll, just sit quiet and I'll not voice it. Because if I voice it, whosoever my leader is or my manager is, they'll say, since you have spotted it, you go and fix it. And I don't want to really, because maybe I don't have the time, I don't have the bandwidth, or maybe I don't want to take on extra work. And so I see a gap in the other BU function or the other process, but I'll just sit mum about it, right? I'll not do anything about it. So that's where we have to do a lot of coaching and engaging with our talent as well. That no, if even if you see a gap in something else that doesn't directly affect you, it affects someone else, it affects the organization
Right.
for sure,
Right.
right? So you have to voice it. You have to, again, either you don't want to work on it, fine, but you have to either raise a flag or an alarm, right? So that someone else is aware and someone else starts fixing it or looking into it. So
Sure.
that's the kind of ownership I'm talking about. So it's not affecting me directly, indirectly, I'm fine about it, so I'll not do anything about it, right?
Yeah. And when we do talent consulting, actually, I've used this word that people say that give me the position, then I'll show the performance.
Yeah.
Whereas it's actually vice
It's
versa.
actually the other way
You show
around.
the performance and then you will be given the position.
Exactly. So I've always, again, coming back to my ambiguity days, where you will never feel fully ready to play the role until you are playing the role,
Yeah.
right? And even to ask for a better position or a pay raise, or that designation, that fancy title that you're looking for, you should start playing that, taking some responsibilities, even couple of months, even years before you even won that.
Given
So
that
that's where
position.
you show that high agency driven, high goal, high endurance, in terms of I'm ready to cut out and I'm ready to play that role. And now, just because I've done this ABC, I'm ready. I'm ready for that next designation or position or whatever that is.
True. So my next question, Supriya, will be around that. What's one mistake most companies make while setting up or scaling GCC? You already talked about one about the talent. Any other mistake that you commonly see
Yeah.
people make when either they are setting up a GCC or scaling?
See, while setting up, I think your initial first 50 hires and your first leadership hires in setting up, when you're setting up a GCC, is very, very important. That's very critical. That's a critical phase, right? See, because when you are setting up a GCC, and of course, when you're looking for scale at certain point in time, you need those high agency, high driven individuals, right? Irrespective of the seniority or the hierarchy, because you are first of all the face of GCC, right? And you are the ones who are putting in your heart and soul and everything beyond the 9 to 5. And you are the initial chosen ones. And then how do you curate that talent is really important, where I've seen people make mistakes, or maybe not calculated risks, but you have to get that math right. The initial few hires, even your engineers, your leadership, because those are the ones who will actually make or break your success in terms of scaling or positioning your GCC, right? Someone who really understands what your vision is, what the collective goal and mission is, and how are all of your energies channeled and focused on getting that mission vision to the finish line, right? So your initial few hires are really important. And then, of course, in terms of setting up your processes, basically high agency. When I say high agency, you should also trust your initial few hires, your teams, and you should give them the autonomy to run their respective areas and fields and not micromanage them.
So building the
Right.
Chuck the India team.
Yeah.
And
So someone enabling them, empowering them, making them play out their initial few years, and just sitting back and just guiding them, having their back. So even if they fail, it's fine, but just go all in, go and just achieve that. But then that high agency teams also come with a lot of you have to give them a lot of autonomy. You need to have that trust in them. Because if you are asking them to have high agency but you are limiting their autonomy, then there is again a gap and there'll be attrition.
you can't get a Ferrari
Yes,
and then
yes.
use it for loading.
Absolutely, you can't do that. Yeah. So their growth, their clarity, the vision, what are you trying to build, what are your future plans in terms of scaling, how are you differentiating yourselves, I think that gives them the fuel, the push to keep going, right, at uncertain times and with whatever you ask of them. So in that case, you need to really trust them and give them high autonomy in terms of running the way they want. And of course, you are there to back them up. So that initial few hires, be it leadership or even your engineering tech teams, delivery teams, those are really important. Of course, I'll not say that we haven't made those mistakes. We
Right.
have, but then we have learned, we have failed fast, we have pivoted, and then we have course corrected as well, right? But that is one for sure, that because it's all about your people business, right?
Yeah.
No matter, you might use those fancy terms, you use AI, you do platform engineering, all of that is great, but you need to have the right people with the
People.
right attitude, the right mindset, and then the right skills.
I think that's a core, probably the observation from the
Correct.
leaders.
Yeah.
Because as you were talking about it, I could recall a conversation. So we were having a small group conversation, like 20, 30 entrepreneurs,
Yeah.
with Deep Kalra, founder
Yeah.
of Make My Trip.
Oh,
And
okay,
he
nice.
again talked about the same thing, that
Okay.
people were like, what is the most important thing?
Correct,
And he said, the
correct.
building that initial
Correct.
team.
Initial team. Yeah.
That
Yeah.
is the most important
Yeah,
thing that
exactly.
one
Who can
should-
take you from 0 to 1, 1
Right.
to 10, and then 10 to 100. Those initial founding team, right?
Yes.
They have really high stakes, ownership,
Mhm.
high agency folks. Yeah.
Great. And now, when we talk about attrition, because I think lately we have seen, while we are talking about the growth of GCCs,
Yeah.
the attrition at GCC is again a big conversation. So, is it really a talent problem or leadership problem, or let's talk more
Yeah.
about the attrition in GCC?
See, again, as I mentioned, the attrition in GCC is high because, first of all, there's a lot of other GCCs who are hiring predominantly for a pretty much similar role. So, just having the kind of work that they would be doing, or the kind of course, other perks and benefits put together along with your salaries, that is one aspect for sure. But I think attrition is not a talent problem. It's got to do with the organization, right? The way you treat them, the way you involve them in certain important decisions or ways of working or important areas or initiatives, right? That is important, right? See, sometimes and most often, talent leave because they don't have that clarity, they don't have that ownership, they don't have that vision, because probably you have not provided them that clarity of thought or that vision, right? See, sometimes the organizations might say our vision is X. We'll only be doing this. We'll not be saying yes to any other thing. But along the line, they'll see that you are also doing something Y, which you again
Right.
mentioned that you will not be doing. But why? What has suddenly changed? So that internal communication, that comms is important, right?
And
So
not just com, probably where a person who is below your hierarchy but still can question you.
Exactly.
Having that level of environment, when you said that
Exactly.
you only said we won't do it, then
Correct.
why you are doing
Correct.
it? You
Correct.
need guts to ask that question to your leader, right?
Exactly. True. So one is questioning your leadership.
Right.
If you think that things are going down south and they are, deviating away from what you had initially mentioned. Second is, of course, that clarity and internal comms. And then even, the career, the progression growths, all of those aspects put together. So it's rarely about the talent. It's about what they see when they are within your organization, and what they see that what the other organization will offer them, right? In terms of growth, in terms of the kind of work they would be doing. Sometimes it also happens that you have hired them to do certain X, right? But you are asking them to do Y,
Yeah.
right? And it can be because, not entirely it's your fault, because maybe things are fluid, you didn't have much clarity back then, and they've been asked to do Y. But for how long, right? Or is this the new normal? So I think that internal dialogue, conversation, comms to within the talent as well, right? So if something has changed, that why this, if this has changed, for how long, what is our future roadmap, growth plans, all of that. And then one is the company side of you, and of course my individual performance and my individual self development plan and growth as well, right?
Okay.
And maybe if I'm burdened, how can I build a team around me? So all of that. So your initial and specifically if your high agency folks are leaving, that's an again that's a red signal, right?
Right.
That's a red flag in terms of why
So
are
as
they
I can
leaving.
see, it's not just transaction that
It
people are
isn't-
joining
yeah,
and
no,
going
no,
away.
no.
You need to look at the
Yeah,
whole journey,
correct,
like
correct.
what you are doing for them. and
Exactly. So the
how they can build
entire
the connection.
360,
Yeah,
correct.
360
The
degree
entire
review.
360 yard, that circle of the self retrospection, the company play, vision, growth, and their individual growth as well. And whosoever they are interacting on a day to day basis, how supportive they are of their decision and ways of working as well, right?
But-
See, sometimes the way you mentioned questioning the leadership, right? Sometimes I've also seen the ideas get shot down. So I have an innovative idea, but even before I voicing it out, it was shut down that this will not work.
Yep.
Sometimes it might be true as well, but what's the harm in even hearing or listening out, right? It might or might not work, but sometimes even getting those innovative ideas or challenging a leader, that let's try this if this is not working, so let's give it a shot, right? Let's try it out. But see, all these put together is what I believe the leadership and the organization, it's not very conducive to my personal growth, and that is where the talent feels it's better to move out now.
Yeah.
And it's rarely about salaries or all of that stuff, but I think it's mostly about how you make them feel about their own self, the company growth, their individual growth. So I think leaders
So
have
building a
a lot more
relation,
responsibility. I've seen this in my organization as well. So for every hire that leaves, or for every attrition, I do a self retrospection of what could we have done better. So I have that one-on-one as well with my talent, as in of course there's no going back now, but what are the lessons so that we taken into account for all the future hires, or what could have we done differently, or is there any way where we could have supported you where we didn't, and whether you felt that you were left out in the open and there was absolutely no coming back. So all of these conversations, these are actually lessons for leaders as well, and
Yeah.
even for the other teams. And again, this is a global organization, right? We all work globally, virtually, remotely. So I think trying to understand each other's viewpoint, respect and trust, and then creating that boundaries as well, because everyone works in different time zones. So
Right.
I might not be answerable in your time zone, and whether even if it's an urgent task. So I think that internal I think it all boils down to communication as well, right? So if I'm expecting something from you, when am I expecting that by? So the timelines, the quality, and if there's any external dependency, internal dependency, how do we work it out? So all of that.
So
So basically
leaders have
everything.
to do a very deep analysis.
Yes,
It's not
yes,
just that people
yes.
are coming and going.
Exactly, yeah. And it's not that you've just made a hire and now you are
Yeah.
good, so that hire is in your system, he or she is going through an onboarding induction. No. So there's a constant dialogue, there's a constant communication. So of course, we all say it's an open door policy. People can walk up to us at any given point in time and ask any questions. But then one is the safe inclusive space that you are creating, but then also acting upon whatever feedback you have received, right? Of course, not every feedback can be acted within a stipulated amount of time, but what to prioritize, when to prioritize, and
Everything is
just
important.
again collating all the feedback, all the responses is also important. So having that anonymous forums and asking them to voice their concerns, questions, suggestions, feedback, all of that is also really important.
Yes, yes. And so, Supriya, you talked about that ClearOut is a platform, AI native platform engineering, and AI is the most critical buzzword for recent time, right? So, how can India actually lead in AI instead of just adopting it?
Yeah. See, an interesting point. India is doing a lot in terms of consuming what's already out there, right? Be it a Claude or an OpenAI or a Meta or a Grok, DeepSeek. I
Yeah.
think we are great at consuming stuff. But I think a lot of focus should be on building those AI systems, those models, foundation models, LLMs. And I think there's a lot of push from the government as well. So we see a lot of these server models being built, or make in India, build in India kind of initiatives, right? So that is great. So I want to see a lot of India moving from just consuming those LLMs and models to building their own AI assisted systems, right? And when you build an entire system end to end, that's when you understand how the systems fail, behave, scale, what are the issues in terms of production grade systems, is where I want to see India going.
Got it.
But I do see a lot of these small language models being built, 7 billion parameter models being built, so which is great. And I think India has a lot of advantage in terms of the data, right? And data is the new oil, as we all know. So
Yes.
data, and in terms of the multilingual, stuff that we have, so multiple languages. So a lot of AI is being built in speech to text, text to speech, because India is a perfect playground and a bedrock for having access to data.
And the
Uh,
mobile access. Number
the
of people
mobile access,
actually
exactly, the
having a mobile
internet
access.
first, mobile first, AI
Yes.
native first, in terms of just even learning and doing research about the consumerism, right? because India is a lot consumerism based market. So apps that we used, Uber, Zomato, Swiggy, all of that. So there's a lot of data that's already available. But how do we build those initial foundation models, and how do we make sense of it? Is what I will love to see India doing, and I'm sure a lot of us are building in that space. So that's an interesting and an exciting phase to be in. But I think
Okay.
the next couple of years will be very crucial for India in terms
Yes.
of Make in India, the Bharat AI Association, the Bharat AI initiative that we saw a couple of months ago. So that is really important, and the
And the
government.
conference of AI summit
Correct,
happened.
correct. The
Yes.
AI Summit conference
Yes.
that happened in Delhi.
All the
In,
top CEOs on the
exactly,
world were
exactly.
there.
Yeah, yeah. And the showcases that we
Yeah.
had, right, and the initiatives we are taking, the funding the government is pushing through is massive, massive. It's quite impressive, right? So how do we just make sense of it, not just be in the consumption mode, but also in the
To the
building mode
building.
at the forefront, right? So that is really interesting of how that will all pan out.
Great. So moving from consuming to becoming a builder, how
Correct.
we can actually
Correct.
start creating things
Correct. Yeah.
which others can use.
Yeah.
Probably similar to something which happened with the DPI, like QR code,
Correct.
like how
Correct.
other countries are
Correct.
now adopting the
Exactly.
innovation from
Exactly.
India.
Exactly.
So
Yeah. Yeah.
similar thing we are expecting for AI.
Absolutely. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So billions and billions of transactions every day through UPI. Our digital infrastructure is massive. It's quite impressive. And now how other countries, even other, developed
It's a
countries.
showcase to them now.
Exactly.
Like I think when Prime Minister moved with head of other countries,
Correct.
they actually show that how QR code
Exactly.
payment is made
Exactly.
and
Yeah.
how swiftly
Yeah.
that is done.
Yeah. Yeah. True. True. Yeah.
Right. So Supriya, whenever we are talking about AI and any other engineering, the projects, I think one of the core skill or the talent that we talked about, right? So there is a panic around the talent that will they be relevant? Because I think head of Anthropic and many other organizations have started saying that code in the future will be written by the AI tools, right? So software engineers are still in little panic that will they be relevant.
Yeah. Yeah.
So what's your thought on it, that will they be relevant? And secondly, what one skill that engineer should have, because you started yourself as an engineering person, right?
Correct.
And now heading an engineering organization.
Yeah.
So what one skill that you see they should keep their focus on so that they can remain relevant in the industry?
Sure. See, first of all, in my opinion, I do believe that engineers will be relevant, right? Engineers who use AI as one of their tools will be more relevant, right?
Okay.
Than those who absolutely don't use AI or don't want to use AI at all. I don't think latter is the case because, see, and I know, and I do get a lot of these questions as well, whether specifically people or Gen Zs who have just started their career in engineering and in development, in coding, because there's a lot that's already available, right? You have your GitHub Copilot, Microsoft Copilot, all these vibe coding tools, all the Claude and GPTs of the world. So, see, the best part is the AI can only be doing a fair job if it has enough context. If you just simply write a prompt that write this code for me, it will give you a shitty code that will not work in production, and more importantly, it will also break the other code that's already there.
Right.
But if as an engineer, if you don't have the context, or if you don't know how to even fix an AI written code, how to debug it, and how to make it work in production, then it's a disaster, right? So I think engineers should be self-reliant. They should be using AI, and of course writing AI or writing AI driven code as well. But all of that with an understanding that he or her, they themselves should be understanding what engineering means. How do we write best practices in code? See, AI can help you with the syntax of how do I write a particular piece of code in Java versus a Python or a JavaScript, right? But it cannot make sense of your particular customer's environment, your domain. Why is this being written or done in the first place? All of that context and smartness and intelligence is what the human will have to bring to the table, right? So, and if you use AI in the context of domain, which is a BFSI or a healthcare on energy, then that combination is deadly, right? That's massive. But I think every individual or every engineer who has started their journey now recently, or who are all very experienced folks in their own fields, I think they should definitely use AI, but to an extent where they are controlling or they are in the driving seat, right?
Mm.
Where they understand even if a code has been written by AI, whether this is correct, this is not correct, whether the AI has hallucinated, whether this will work in my production environment, whether if there is an issue or if there is a breakage, I should be in a position to analyze and debug the code and fix the code. If I need another AI to analyze what this issue is for some code that has already been written by another AI, then you are setting yourself up to failure.
Right. And while you were saying this, I could recall one conversation that I think people ask Elon Musk and other leaders that what should we actually teach our kids
Correct.
when everything will be done by AI?
Yeah.
And he mentioned a remark like sciences, physics will still be relevant.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
understanding the basics. So actually, when
Yeah.
we do the talent consultancy, what I have observed, low orbit engineers stick to the tools,
Correct.
medium orbit stick to the technology, and high orbit stick to the sciences.
Absolutely.
So I think that is one thing that you start focusing more on the sciences behind everything.
Exactly. And your other question, Vikas, very rightly put. You also mentioned what is that one engineer
Yeah.
skill that engineers should focus on. See, all through our life, we have seen engineers are focused on writing and building code. But understanding the science of how the system is built, how this will behave in a certain condition, how it will scale, what if it fails, and what are certain guardrails or bedrock stuff that I need to build, the foundation that I need to build, is what is that one skill that all engineers should have. The sciences, the mechanics, the physics of certain thing working in a certain way, right?
As again Elon Musk say, the first
Exactly.
principle thinking,
Absolutely.
that you break things to the part to the
Absolutely.
that, okay, it's in the
Absolutely.
first principle
So just
format.
being curious enough, trying to understand how this works, and if it works in a certain way, what if I try to do say X and it fails, but then trying to understand the mechanics and the working of any particular system or app that is being built, and not just writing code in silos and not just being responsible for your piece of code. I think that is, if you have that mindset, that is easily replaceable by AI even in today's world. You don't have to wait another 2 or 3 years down the line. But if you understand the physics and the sciences and the mechanics, that is where AI struggles, because AI needs a lot of context. So that is where you must have seen a lot of people are now taking courses on prompt engineering, right?
Right.
How to write good, better prompts,
Prompt.
detailed prompts with user instructions, with dependencies, with prerequisites, blah, blah, blah.
But unless people understand the concept, how will they write the prompt?
Exactly. First, you need to be clear of what you're trying to achieve. That's where you can give AI, certain prompt engineering techniques and guardrails that I want this. I want you to do this, but don't do that. And do it within these and these guidelines and frameworks. But that's exactly what the AI doesn't understand. If you just give a generic prompt, it will give you a very generic, answer.
Garbage in, garbage
Exactly,
out.
garbage in, garbage out. So again, just using an AI code in production without having enough context or without you knowing yourself what you are getting into, it's very, very dangerous and deadly as well. So I think engineers should use AI as an assisted tool, but not completely. It will be replaced by AI. I don't think so. Yeah.
So
Again,
probably,
my personal opinion, but we need to see how things unfold in the near future. But yeah.
it may sound filmy, but it's like Iron Man also had AI assistant
Yeah.
Jarvis,
Yeah.
but still you have to be the Iron Man.
Correct.
You have to be the smart person. You have to have the courage, curiosity
Exactly.
great
And the
things.
general intelligence, right?
Right.
People are talking about AGI as well
Right.
now. So yeah, of course, that the curiosity, the context, and the mechanics, specifics of how things work, that will only come from a human. Yeah.
Great. So we'll change our course now a
Sure.
little bit. So it will be a fun rapid fire round.
All
Just a couple of questions,
Yeah.
and you can give answer one
Sure.
to two, but just be
Yeah,
quick
yeah.
on those things.
Yeah.
So coffee or chai?
I'm a chai person.
Great. Hiring for skill or attitude?
Always attitude. Skills can be taught, technology can be taught, but attitude can't be taught.
Okay. And AI replaces job or creates more job?
Definitely creates more jobs. Yeah. See, there is also a concept now of forward deployed engineers. If you would have
FDEs,
heard
yes,
this,
yes.
right?
I think one of the company publicized it, and now many companies are adopting to this.
Yeah. So see, basically, forward deployed engineers are working with your customer teams and working together as a solutions and an implementation team, right? So basically, AI will create more jobs in terms of the ethicalness, the privacy, the security, even trying to understand what you're trying to build with AI. So all those of roles will go up. AI will definitely create more jobs, but of course it'll take away few jobs as well if you're not well versed with AI or how to use AI as an assisted tool, right? So if you're too stuck or if you're too in your old school way of thinking, then definitely it'll take up jobs, some of the very mundane jobs, but it'll definitely create many more as well. But
Yeah.
then you need to be open, you need to be curious, you need to be taking those risks, you need to be again playing the role of forward deployed engineers, so working very closely and thinking ahead of the curve and ahead of the game with your customers, solutionizing with them, co-creating with them, and implementing with them is an interesting phase how this AI era will pan out.
And on a lighter note, we can say that in the court of law, machine will not stand. You have to
Yeah.
stand. So one has
Yes.
to own.
Yeah.
Even if everything is done
Absolutely.
by AI, there has to be a signing authority
Absolutely.
where judge can ask the question
Yeah.
to this person.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
they have to have that ownership. Okay. Going back to the fun rapid fire. So one word for Indian tech talent.
It's resilient, I would say. Resilience is the word.
And would you like to explain it?
See, Indian tech talent, again, a little bit of Hindi, we are very jugadu in that sense, right? So we know
Frugal
how
innovation.
frugal innovation, we don't need much to, deliver something. So with whatever resources are easily available to us, I think we have been doing great so far. We will be doing great in the future as well. But resilience, so even if one thing doesn't work out, how do you know course correct, pivot, do something else? How do you rise back stronger from whatever setbacks you've had? So I think that way Indian talent has seen a lot of these wins, a lot of innovations, mindset paradigm shifts that they have seen, but they have been resilient, is what I would say.
And probably I'm just recalling a conversation. So in my previous podcast,
Yeah.
when I asked the speaker that what is the difference between a professional in US and in India, and the difference was that if something is not happening, US person or Western person will raise the concern.
Correct.
It is not happening. And India, it's like ho jayega.
Ah,
It's
yes,
okay. It's ho
yes,
jayega. When you can
yes.
clearly see it will not be
Yeah,
done,
yeah.
but still ho
Correct,
jayega.
correct. True, true. Yeah.
So probably
Yeah.
there's a
Yeah.
good side of it and the bad side of it.
Flip side of it
Flip
as well.
side of
Yeah,
it as
yeah.
well. But yeah, okay. And one word for your leadership style.
See, I've always been vocal about saying that I'm a servant leader, right? So, enabling, empowering, but servant leadership is what I associate myself well with.
Okay.
Because I feel I'm responsible for a team and for running a region. So, for me, their concerns is of utmost priority. So, I actually be the person who is listening on the ground to whatever is happening and whatever people have to say, but then prioritizing certain stuff and then taking action. But then for me, I feel I'm serving my people, and hence I believe in that servant leadership style of leadership.
Makes sense. And one last question: startup hustle or corporate stability?
Always startup hustle, yeah, because the kind of stuff that you get to work with, the teams, the bond, the camaraderie, the vision, because you are almost you are actually driving the car. Yeah, you have that front seat. You are seeing your startup grow, fail, setbacks, reach the vision, reach the potential, and the art of the possible, right?
Yeah.
Because startups, you have to get things done. There's no bureaucratic culture. There's no yes sir, yes ma'am culture. So I love the startup hustle.
And I was talking to somebody and he said that, yeah, when we were very small team, now we could just move the feature out in within 1 week. Now
Exactly.
I don't know why we are spending 2 months
Exactly.
just to get the
See,
same
because
feature
the
out.
larger you grow, there's a lot of processes, bureaucracy that's baked in, right? And if it's for the right reason, I don't mind. But sometimes, it's just a process, it's just a tick in the box, and you don't know why certain things are being built and driven in certain way. So then that becomes a little more difficult, and that's where you lose your vision, mission, and your sense of purpose of working in that team, and then you might see attrition as well. So I think all of that is linked.
Linked, yes.
Yeah.
Now, going back to the questions, but now I'm asking a different track question. So, when I was looking at your profile, you work a lot with women leaders,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
but now people are giving advices.
Yeah.
But what one advice you often hear given to women leaders that you don't agree with?
Okay, that's an interesting one. So I think women leaders, and it has been given to me as well early on in my career, that now is not the right time, right? So I absolutely completely don't agree with this.
Hmm.
I always feel that you cannot be fully ready before taking on something or before getting into something, right? And again, this interesting take is what I've always seen, that if there is a job advert out there, women will always see I either need to at least take 80%, if not 100%. Only then if I'll go and apply.
Yeah.
But I've seen men just having even a 20% match, they'll just go and apply for that job, right? So that's a stark difference between men and women, specifically working in, the service sector, the job sector. So I think now is not the right time is a bad advice. The time will never be right. You have to get started at some point with whatever resources you have. With you just need to have the right positive mindset, right? Things will fall into play. But then the biggest fear of not even starting, forget the right time, not even starting, that will be the biggest fear, because you didn't even start. You won't know what are the challenges, what are the positives, what are the negatives of starting. So I think now is not the right time is one advice that I've always heard, which I have never agreed with.
Okay, now it's not the right time is not
Yeah.
the right
Yeah.
message.
Yeah.
Okay, and probably I could recall. So I was mentoring a lady in US. She was working in a big IT company in the sales,
Yeah.
with 25 years of experience in
Yeah.
sales.
Yeah.
And when I coached Indian women, I always see that factor of guilt, that away from home guilt.
Yeah.
It is always there when
Yeah.
you can justify that why it is there, but still that
Yeah.
I'm not with kids, I'm not with my family.
True.
But she was also talking about the same thing, and she
Mm.
was like, I will be away for 2-3 days conference and I'm worried how my family will be.
Correct.
So
Yeah.
that for women, that away from family is kind of a constant guilt that they have to deal with.
That is true, and no matter what a woman does or how much she accomplishes, that will always be in her guilt, in her inner critic, right?
Yeah.
That some voice, inner critic, will say that I have not been able to do this, I have not been able to do that. But the fact of the matter is, she will never be able to do everything, right?
Yeah.
So it's like prioritizing, and of course, when a woman does prioritize, she takes care of everything at the home front as well. But then somehow that inner guilt, that inner critique is there. And to be honest, it's with men as well, not just women. But then it's just the women who always gets asked of how do you manage both. No one questions the man of how will he manage both the home front and the office front, right? Or if he gets promoted, no one asked, like, you will be putting in more hours and more responsibility. So how are you even managing the home front? Because that's always an innate question to the woman. And also because women are naturally even caregivers, and they are naturally quite empathetic and curious and loving and caring nature that women have. So it's not it's always an ask for the women and not the man, right? But I think now the shift or the narrative is changing, because I see a lot of men and women equally being responsible for each other's careers, as well as at the home front as well.
Yeah.
Which earlier was not to be seen in our parents' generation and all. But even our generation, we see a lot of support ecosystem from our spouses, from our in-laws, and other wider support system as well from friends and family. So that is a positive
shift.
Positive shift. Yeah. And I hope it'll only get better than this from here. Yeah.
Great. Now, talking about, if you have to give one piece of advice to someone who wants to become top 1%, because you have like had a steep career movement in your career, like, so what will be that one piece of advice if you want to become top 1% in your career?
See, I think everyone talks about hard work, dedication, sincerity, but I think whosoever you want to become, and if you have a clear vision and path in your head, I think talk to the relevant industry folks and have a mentor, right? Because that has personally helped me. But having a mentor, building your network, because network is your net worth, right? And having a network, and then I think compounding really pays, right? So have those connections built, not with a view that if I'm, say, doing a podcast with you, probably I'll get something from you, or you will get benefited from me, not with a view to benefit, but somewhere or the other the relationship pays, right? If not sooner, but later down the line. So having those relationships built, that network created and built around you, and also having a mentor early on in your life, if you're really clear from that very same field, if you can get some mentor who can guide you on the right track, specifically not just what to do but what not to do. I think that is important, and compounding helps. It intensifies with the period of time. So you might not benefit immediately, but one day for sure, right? Right. So that is one thing I've always believed in.
So having mentors and
Yeah.
professional
The
network.
professional networks, right? And just knowing somebody, what they are doing, how are they scaling, what are some of the challenges that they are facing, having those micro conversations, I think that is really important, because as I mentioned, that you might not benefit immediately or sooner as well, but somewhere later down the line there might be a possible way or path where you could cross paths again, where you could again mutually benefit from each other. Again, not monetarily as well, but somewhere or the other you might click, or you might, have
As
certain
Steve
notes.
Jobs said, you
Exactly.
can't connect the dots forward.
Correct.
You always
Correct.
connect the dot backwards.
Correct, backward. Yeah, yeah.
When I was searching on you about on the internet, I saw a lot of your work towards the social sector.
Yeah.
So let us know more about it, like where it is coming from and what's
Yeah.
your idea behind
Yeah.
it.
See, I've been a big advocate and proponent of women in tech, right? And otherwise, also specifically women who have taken break, who want to again make a comeback in the workforce, taking a break for certain elderly care or child care or whatever that could be, right? But I see there's a lot of potential in women, and they are again trying to make an entry back in the workforce. So how can we generate different programs, different initiatives around that, right?
Okay.
See, because having diverse perspectives in your workforce and talent is also equally important, right? So people from different communities, under deserved communities, marginally weaker economic sections, and all those different representations in the team is equally important, because different diverse perspectives actually challenge your decisions more, your ways of working more, and then the output is really healthy and really successful, is what I've personally believed. But then it also comes from a point that I want to give back to the community and the society in such a way that even if even if a single soul is touched in a positive way, that's a good enough validation for me of me being in on this earth and doing my job and going away, right? But not just women in tech, and again, as I mentioned, working with some of the underrepresented economies and societies as well, just giving them a dignified way of living life, just giving them an opportunity, a platform and a podium where they can work for themselves in a dignified way, and they can support themselves and their respective families. I think whatever we could do in that space is what I've been doing. I've been equally joined by some other passionate men and women, so we have multiple forums and groups and communities where we do such stuff. But yeah, that's about it.
Yeah, probably we some other time we can talk more about
Sure.
this
Yeah.
social
Yeah.
work, because at WTT we also have certain wings, because
Sure.
we mentored
Nice.
women who were on career break.
Yeah.
We mentored
Yeah.
women who were
Yes.
having multiple breaks, and they had that anxiety that if
Correct.
I'll go to the next interview,
Correct.
they will ask that why those many career breaks.
Correct. Correct.
So how to manage those, how to mentally and emotionally get
Yeah.
over those kind of
Sure.
things. And also when I see that still there will be some Ramanujan at the grassroots
Yeah.
level even
Yeah.
today.
Yeah.
Can we find out that Ramanujan? So with our app, we are trying those things, that can we find the extraordinary talent at the grassroots level
Absolutely.
and help them.
Absolutely.
So we can talk more about this
Absolutely.
sometime,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
it's so much important.
Yeah. True. Yeah.
Now my last question, Supriya, would be around that we know a lot about you from the LinkedIn,
Yeah.
the presence that is there on the website.
Correct.
But for our audience, what is one side of Supriya Rao that people don't see on LinkedIn?
Okay, that's also quite interesting. I think I've loved your questions so far,
Thank you.
Vikas, on this podcast. Yeah. All right. See, what people see is the outside perspective of me on different podcasts or seminars or events that I've spoken, or my LinkedIn handle will talk about my successes, right? Of course, that doesn't talk about my failures, but have I not gone through failures? Absolutely, yes. I've gone through multiple of them. But in the process of living life and seeing, having seen multiple setbacks, failures on a personal, professional level, I've become very reflective, right? So I reflect and I ponder a lot on different people that I meet, the different systems that I work upon, the different behaviors that I see, the different relationships that I've built, right? So I'm a lot more thinker. I reflect a lot. I sometimes do a lot of observation. I'm very good at observing people, stuff, scenarios, behaviors of how the power dynamics are playing between two individuals or multiple people. So I'm a great listener. I'm a great observer. So that is what most people probably won't see or won't know about me just by looking at the outside facade of what they see, right?
Okay.
So I do love to reflect, I do love to observe, and I do have my own notes that I make in my mind, right, about certain people, about certain behaviors, systems, ways of thinking, ways of working. So I think that comes with a lot of effort, time that I've taken, the years that I've spent in the industry, and also with a lot of setbacks, failures, and even successes. But then that actually makes you stronger, right? So
Right.
I may be a lot more visible on my LinkedIn handle that I'm talking here, I'm doing this, I'm working there, I'm hosting this event, CXO event. But then deep down, I'm quite an observant person. I'm quite a reflective person. So self retrospection as well, and well as whatever is happening in the outside world. So I do like to ponder a lot on that, and I love to ponder on that in my free time when I'm all by myself. So I do think a lot. People might say, or I might also feel I'm an overthinker at times, but I love to think about certain situations that have happened recently in the past, and then make some notes about how that entire mind map pans about. Yeah.
I can so very much relate to that. And
Yeah.
just to add, when in for my book Top 1% Leaders,
Yeah.
when I actually researched people, so I found that top 1% leaders are having OBL, observation based learning.
Yeah.
So I actually mentioned and researched on this
Sure.
that it is one of the consuming. So
Correct.
otherwise people will see that attending seminars or
Yeah.
attending classes
Yeah.
or even reading books,
Yeah.
that's only form of learning.
Correct.
But I have noticed this, that observation, OBL itself is a big
Yes,
learning tool.
yes, yes.
What it can teach you, nobody can
Yes,
just judge. But
yes.
there are a lot of
Yeah,
opportunities.
Yeah.
Okay. So though I mentioned that was my last question, but again now
Sure.
because I think that
Yeah,
question
yeah,
is even more
yeah.
important. What is your one thing that you want to be remembered for, like 200 years afterwards? Like
Yeah.
how do you want people remember you for?
Yeah. I think people who have known me so far, people who know me very, very closely in my inner circle, they've always known me as a go getter, right? So, as I mentioned, there have been many setbacks, personal, professional failures as well, but I've risen back stronger. I've come back stronger, sharper. So, basically, a go getter. But again, I don't want people to remember me as that, because people who are already in my inner circle know me by that. But I think coming back to that social angle is also what I mentioned. If I could have touched even one soul, one life, and again, not in a way by just helping them out, by giving them a platform or a podium of them living a dignified life all by themselves. I think even if I could have touched that one soul and people remember me by that even after multiple years, I think that is where I'll feel my job is well done. Yeah.
Great, great. So thanks, Supriya,
Yeah.
for being on our show,
Yeah.
sharing so much insights. I'm sure things that you have shared will shape up the future leaders,
I hope,
women
yes.
leaders, tech leaders, that what are things that are working out, how
Yes.
they can grow.
Yeah.
Thanks again for being on
Yeah.
WTD
And
podcast.
thank you very much, Vikas, for having me here on this podcast. I would love to know more about the book as well as the app that you're trying to
Yes.
build on the grassroots level, because that's really interesting. And I really love the set of questions. I'm sure you have done due diligence and research about me, and I loved your line of questioning as well. And
Thank you.
thank you once again for having me here on the podcast. And I thoroughly enjoyed the discussion.
Thanks for being here. So thank you everyone for watching the WTT podcast show. I'm sure you have liked it. Whatever you can do, you can utilize the learning shared from this podcast. You can like, subscribe, and comment on our YouTube channel. If you have any question, you can visit worldclasstechtalent.com, because you already know IT job की tension WTT है ना. Bye bye.